Good morning and welcome to the start of the Sunday broadcast of all the remainder of the racing action at the Le Mans Classic. Just to put you in the picture, it's a beautiful sunny Sunday morning. And look at the images on the screen. It's Patrick Simon driving a D-Type, a short-nosed D-Type, in a way that puts the hair up on the back of my neck. He's been the great entertainer. And to let you understand the format that Martin Haven and I will be talking you through, we have 6 batches of cars, and they've just started their 3rd race. They all get a 3-crop rotation. They have a day race, a night race. We've come through the night, and now they're having their finale. Each race around 53 minutes, and just the sight of Patrick Simon swinging the tail around up through the Dunlop curve, Martin, sets us off to a flying start. Absolutely. The day got underway with the first of the groups of cars, the early years from 1923 to 1939, and those finished under a red flag. They lost a lap because there was oil down everywhere. But now this is the start of the 2nd lap for these cars. Jaguar D-Types, 1st and 2nd, but in 3rd place, Mighty Mouse Martin Stretton, the familiar green helmet of the historic racing specialist in his Maserati. Martin Stretton hauling up behind the E-Type, the Monteverde Pearson E-Type, onto the long Mulsanne straight. Well, these are Grid 2, Plateau 2. These are the cars that raced in period between 1949 and 1956, and that pale blue E-Type out front was the star of race 1. They also started on pole and won race 2 on the road, but there's a little bit more to it than just getting to the flag first. Martin Stretton skates down the inside of the D-Type in the Maserati and slots up into 2nd place. That's a 250S Maserati, the smaller of the 2 Maserati sports cars here. We've got a 450S as well. Maserati 250S, lighter and more aerodynamic, and in Stretton's hands, extremely nimble. The car in front is not a local taxi who's strayed onto the track. That is a Dina Panhard, which also raced in period. Fast cars with prototypes up against GT cars 3 weeks ago. Prototype drivers, you have never had it so good, let me tell you. There's the Cadillac Monstre 1947 Beast, which has run out of brakes on its opening lap. 1950 car rather, and looks to have survived without damage. Now what we're seeing already, Martin, is the D-Type with Carlos Monteverde in front, number 21, has the legs down the straight, but Martin Stretton he's sharing with Richard Wilson, but Mighty Mouse is tucked in behind, using the slipstream. We see him in the corners. He manages to get ahead all over. We saw him going into the first chicane really, really late on the brakes. Typical trademark of Martin. But as soon as it comes out of the corners, you'll have Monteverde punching forward in that 21 D-Type. But both of them, of course, have one target, and that is to try and catch up with Patrick Simon in the pale blue number 3 D-Type that he shares with Clive Joy and has been the star of the meeting so far. Unfortunately, we've got a pit visitor. That's the Tordoff 356A with that inimitable green nose on it. They had a little trouble a week or so ago with a blown engine. There is Sam Tordoff, British touring car racer, out negotiating a... what do you reckon those hand signals are saying? I'm not entirely sure, but this is a real shame for them because that car was actually leading overall in this group after the first race. It's not just about who gets the flag first, because the biggest engine, the fastest car, will always do that. So there is a handicapping system as well, a performance of index that allows smaller cars, if they exceed their own performance, if you like, if they sort of perform out of their box, that will put them further up the overall ranking. So Sam Tordoff's car, after the first race yesterday afternoon in sweltering conditions, was the car that led this plateau number 2 on the index of performance. He's sharing with Richard Wilmer in his Pre-A Porsche 356. Now, after the 2nd race, it was another Pre-A 356, car number 30, Jean-François Penila and Gilles Morel. And you'll see that car as well, likely, in the midfield. They were leading on the performance index, and in fact, the best of the D-Types a long way down the number 3 car that leads at the moment in 14th place, ahead of the Carlos Monteverde car in 15th place on the index of performance. So the Tiddlers actually have as much chance of winning outright as the big beasts at the front of the field. Yes, it's very easy, Martin, to look at the front of the field and revel in the way those D-Types and the Maseratis are being driven. But the glory of this meeting, the Le Mans Classic, is that there are battles the whole way down the field. Then you knit in that whole performance index element, and I was going to say everyone's having fun, but come here. I have never seen a Callista before. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So many little cars, but when we had that sight of the little Dina Panhard going down the back straight, we have to remember this batch 2, is for cars from 1949 to 56, and after the war, the first Le Mans 24 hours after the Second World War was in 1949. A lot of people had to bring the cars that went out to play pre-war. Not much had been built thereafter, but then after this period, I mean, during this period, it really took off, and a lot of the cars that then will be racing in batch 3, you could just see the leap forward in terms of technology. But you have to stress there was an incredible mixture of cars in the first Le Mans after the Second World War.
Well, coming towards us, you can see one of the earliest Austin Healey's, the 100M, the 4-cylinder engine before it went to the bigger 6-cylinder 3-litre engine. Lance Aurelia leaning on the door handles. Is that a B19 or a B20? B20, I think. My
quick flick.
Italian. Yes, again, with an entry list 76 cars long, to check these things takes longer usually than the car shot. And what I wanted to spot was what was immediately behind in the shadow of that big Morgan. Well, here again, look at some of the different size of these cars. You've got Mercedes 300 SL, you've got a couple of little Lotuses, and the number 17 D-Type.
The Cooper bobtail at the front of that little pack, and just what a fantastic mix of shapes. Just talking 300 SL Mercedes, there was a massive Art Coriel auction yesterday, and the 300 SL, with only 1,380 kilometres on the clock, was sold for a mere 3.143 million euros.
Here is the battle, as you see the number 17 D-Type pick up 2 spots. In front of it was the number 68 Cooper Bobtail, and in front of them coming to the line was that Lotus. So that was a battle which was originally 5th, 6th, 7th, and they're now 7th, 6th and 5th in that order.
Now, of course, having seen the first couple of races for batch 2, number 3, the D-Type that's leading the way, has won both of them. Carlos Monteverde's car, number 21, that's the cream one, had finished 2nd in both. No, the number 17 D-Type hadn't featured at all because it started the first race from the very back of the grid and made it nowhere near towards the front. But with each race, it's been working its way forward, and in the hands now of John Young, it's really going to stretch its legs. He should be sharing with Nigel Webb, and John is going to try and build up as much of a gap as he can to get towards the leaders. And
Nigel Webb and John Young are racing a car that performed here in period as well. It was the winning car in 1955 with Mai Hawthorne and Ivor Bueb.
Now, fantastic to see a Carrera Panamericana livery, because, of course, in the 1950s, cars generally raced in their national racing colours, but for that fantastic road race around Mexico, desert on roads that were vaguely roads and roads that almost were roads, a phenomenal event. But famously, you had these amazing liveries, and that was a portrait of Eva Perón sur le bonnet.
Yeah, absolutely. They were moving billboards, a lot of them, with very flamboyant, very Mexican, South American related colour schemes, even on some of the most sedate cars. I think the Americans particularly went in for very lurid liveries on a lot of their cars, just because they could. Sweeping out down onto the Mulsanne straight, coming towards us, the 67 car, which is now up into
15th position.
Place.
That's the car that blotted its copybook in the first race with a couple of spins, one of which left it facing the wrong way in the Dunlop curve. Not the nicest place, as you could see everybody arriving before you could rejoin, but the Danish entered Lotus back facing the right way.
There's a little Lotus 11. There's the Dina Panhard with its 2-cylinder engine.
I love the fact it's the Ascension brothers. What are they ascending to?
I'm not suggesting that the driver, it looks old enough to have competed here in 1949, but he has got the look of perhaps a driver of that era.
I think he might have been a gopher, nipping around the paddock back in those days.
The boy. Nice, hirsutely bearded gentleman. And again, although the car is going at nothing like the pace of the front runners, it will be being driven about as flat out as it is sensible to drive a late 1940s 2-cylinder engined saloon car. As you say, Bruce, just to get the race going in 1949 was a big accomplishment, and to get anything together as a racing grid, just, reigniting life again, trying to get some normality back after the unfortunateness of the mid-1940s was a very major part. So any car that could come to the grid, I think, welcomed with open arms. These days, at the 24-hour race, we started 60 cars in the 24 hours this year, which is a phenomenal grid, but nothing like this. In these, every one of these 6 age-related plateau or race groups we're starting a minimum of 76 cars on the entry list, and some of them are up to 80 when all the sort of extra cars have been added in that were on the waiting list. They don't like to turn anybody away, and because the circuit's so long, they don't actually have to turn anybody away.
One of the good things, while you were talking there, Martin, I dug through, and Daniel Ascension is the driver of that Panhardina, and he clearly wasn't around. He was born 3 years later in the middle of June, around the Le Mans weekend, 1952, so he's enjoying his race action, but we have unnecessarily burdened him with about another 15 years of age.
Yeah, but he's at least vaguely of the period. So he's certainly younger than the car, and a lot of the drivers actually are not younger than their cars. A lot of the drivers are a little older than their cars. It's a beautiful little 1500cc Oscar, another small Arini manufacturer. I know Oscar isn't an Arini name, but it's, you know, one of those small Italian bijou manufacturers who built fabulous-looking racing cars.
Tied in very, very tightly with Maserati as the ownership's battle swung one way and another. Just pointing out, that wasn't a pit stop out of sequence. In these races, you have a pit stop window. It is now open. Yep. That one literally must be the first couple of cars in the pit lane. The front runners still blazing around with Patrick Simon 5.5 seconds clear, but Carlos Monteverde starting to wind it up in his D-type in second place, and not too far behind him, but just dropping away a little bit by 3 seconds is Martin Stretton in that beautiful Maserati 250S.
Just closest to the camera, so on Aston Martin DB2, the earliest cars from the Aston Martin stable that were raced. 100M Healy with a factory-style hardtop fixed. Now, in the scorching temperatures, we're sort of not quite sure whether having the sun not on your head or having less airflow is an advantage. I'm not quite sure which. Here is our race leader, as you said, this pale blue E-Type. You know, you associate E-Type Jaguars with dark British racing green. This is, and it doesn't have the, sorry, E-Type, D-Type. It doesn't have the long fin either that you'll see on the slightly later cars. It's that short nose, short tail 1955 car. Certainly being driven with great aplomb.
And we have drivers from a huge number of countries here today. Great to see the Belgian entries, a lot of them this weekend. And love some of the period signs on the side of the car. And now, this is a slightly longer than regular pit stop. They have to have a minimum time in the pit stop, and it doesn't necessarily require fettling, but this one, clearly, there's no point going out over the course of 2.5 races so far. Perhaps a few little niggles have come into play, but at the moment, conditions warm, but not too hot. We've got a very smoky Lotus Lotus 9 coming in the pits. This is one of the quicker cars, got number 64, but it is generally fairly leisurely in the pits. As you can see, just walk around, check the tension on the nuts, and it's Nigel Webb taking over his C-type.
Yeah, so that's the number 18 C-type. The number 11 C-type is in as well. This is Nicholas and Joost Bert from Belgium. And their 1952 C-type, both of these with 3.4-litre XK engines. Here's Martin Stretton again, pushing on hard through traffic. And
we're just determined not to lose any, have the gap going out to the car ahead anymore, because Carlos Monteverde, the number 21 D-type, is escaping, but certainly with the less powerful 250S, Martin Stretton cannot afford to lose any momentum at any point. Therefore, being delayed behind a back marker really wouldn't be a help.
Now, I'm having a wild stab here in saying that might be a Belgian crude car with a picture of Tintin on the side. As with most famous fictional French people, Tintin, his creator Hergé, was Belgian.
Well, I do wonder why, because it's got 2 German drivers, one of which is a Le Mans winner, Marco Werner.
Right, well, maybe.
Oh, one side, show us one, show us the other, and unfortunately, that appears to be your wheel that has come off.
Yeah, that's so another 100 for Austin Healy, and that will have created the spin. In fact, that's not just the wheel, that's the brake disc and caliper and everything. So the hub has separated from the car, and I'm afraid that is going no further. Well, this is the last of their 3 races, as you said, one on Saturday, one at some stage through the night. Theirs will have been after dusk, and rather than in the dead of the night or into the morning, and then another one on Sunday for each of the 3 groups. 43-minute races, and that allows for 1 mandatory driver change. So some of these cars have got a single driver entered, some 2, some 3, some have got as many as 4 drivers entered, but there are in the 3 races 6 stints, so they don't divide up evenly, but they do divide up.
Sam Thomas, Andy D. Crown really pressing on, and you might look at these cars and think, how racy are they really? Because, of course, that was the nature back in period. These cars did become increasingly racing. The C-type Jaguars that we saw both in the pits come out together. They begat the D-type, more pugnacious, and then particularly with the fin coming out behind the driver's head, they really were made for purpose. But to my eye, I still absolutely adore these C-types. And to see on a sunny Sunday morning here at the South, a circuit for which they absolutely were made, it really is so right to see these cars in these wonderful period liveries being driven with considerable vigour, not in the way they would necessarily been driven in the 24 hours, because that was a case of making the cars last for 24 hours, getting through the night and see what happened. But in being able to enjoy them for little sprints of about 53 minutes, they can really, really press on.
And yes, you said, you know, how vigorously are they being driven? Well, the answer was there. Clearly, they had a race into the pit lane, they had a race out of the pit lane, and they're still door handle to door handle. 73 is in. This is Régis Mathieu and Gilles Boyer's Porsche 550 Spider. And this car also raced in period at Le Mans in 1955. That's car number 37. Hello, come in, are you in trouble, number 73. It was 4th overall, and it won its 1500cc class with Helmut Polensky and Richard von Frankenberg. So this is a Le Mans class winner, and just missed out. Porsche 550 Spider just missed out on an overall podium.
Richard von Frankenberg was a German journalist who used to race, and he famously threw down the gauntlet accusing Colin Chapman of having cars that weren't legal, and they went and did a bit of a test, and unfortunately von Frankenberg had to back off, and Colin Chapman was found very much to be in the right. But it was a matter of pride in those days, because the manufacturers were really, really pushing to establish their sports cars, and Le Mans was the showground. This was the point in which, particularly with the many class structures, if you took a class win, it certainly gave a massive boost to your fortunes. And for Lotus, we always think about them in Formula One, but they were racing sports cars and small single-seaters first, and it was the success of selling cars in the sports car arena, particularly with the Lotus Elite, that they really, really kept the coffers topped up to enable Colin Chapman to follow his other flights of fantasy and fancy as they developed their super, super lightweight, very quick cars. And success at Le Mans was a big part of their background.
Yeah, and winning with the small capacity, in the small capacity classes on the index of thermal efficiency, he used 1100cc Climax engines in cars like the 11, the 9, the Lotus Elite, and it was a small capacity engine, but it was in no way really a production-based engine. It was a fully fledged racing engine, so the 1100 Climax was definitely the strong tooth. Now, this is a unique car, the Cunningham C4R. Briggs Cunningham, not a big manufacturer, but a man who very much ploughed his own furrow, designed unique cars, or had unique cars designed to race. That C4R, I mean, look at the sort of aerodynamic lines of the D-type. That's making the most in a sort of aeroplane manner of its power, whereas the C4 Cunningham is definitely a blunt object that forces the air out of its way by sheer grunt and willpower. Now, this is...
And in fact, talking about the grunt and willpower, it's the vibration that car makes. It's just this bomb of noise, and it almost shakes the air off its flanks as it negotiates the track. Quite the noisiest thing out there. There's John Young. He won't be giving a driving change. There, you can see the top two names on the side of the car. Mike Hawthorne and Ivor, the driver for Webb.
And, of course, driven by Wynne Percy and Andy Wallace as well in historic racing more recently. So 774RW, one of the most famous Jaguar D-types. Here again, this is a little Lotus 11. You see the aerodynamic fin behind the driver as well. The bodywork sort of melted down over the tyres to give as low a frontal area as possible.
Yeah, and the driver, Swiss driver Serge Kirknoff, has been going really well in that car, always in the top 10. And certainly that's about 5th or 6th place is as high as you're likely to get in one of these little Lotus 11s, because simply they don't have the legs of the D-type Jaguars.
Here is the D-type that is in 2nd place. This is the Monteverde and Pearson car that's just on its outlap. Leader yet to stop in the pale blue D-type, but 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, all stopped on this lap and have just left the pits, and behind them coming in as well, the remainder of the top 15. So the race leader stays out. It's up to him to choose when he wants to make his pit stop between the pit window opening and the pit window closing. But if you come in too early or if you come in too late, then there are very severe penalties. So you really have to make sure that you don't miss it even by a second or two, because otherwise then you are throwing away a perfectly good race otherwise.
But more to the point now, we're in the third of the 3 races for this batch. You're wasting the results of the first 2 because all your aggregate success is going to be thrown out the window. Most of the top cars, they might be listed with 2 or 3 drivers, but vast majority of them are keeping the one driver in for the whole race. That's something that seems to have evolved through the course of this meeting. They've realised if you're changing from one driver to another, the second driver can spend up to half a lap getting a feel for the brakes and tyres, and unfortunately, yes, you can see that is entirely the correct gesticulation for when you've just had a little bit of a moment. Let's see what happened in the glorious little Oscar. A simple, straightforward spin.
Yep.
Nicely connected. Hold on, 1, 2, 3. Time for gesticulation. Not happened yet. But
what happened there? And the answer obviously is that I ran out of talent. So another Lotus in the pit lane. Lots and lots of pit callers at the moment. That's a Lotus 9. Again, you can see how that sort of those rear wings shrunk down a little and then developed itself into the Lotus 11. And in comes the race leader. So he will come whistling by our commentary position in just a moment or 2.
And like so many of the top runners, they don't...
they don't know when to stop sliding.
Yeah, but also they drive a lot of cars at these meetings. They have to jump from one to another. Patrick Simon, I think, will be coming out as well in a BMW M1, which he races regularly on the European historic scene, but a chance for him to drive something older in a family steeped with history, one of 3 racing brothers, but Patrick is the predominant one. Keeps his hand in as a race commentator, but keeps his proper hand in with a spot of racing, and he's certainly loved every second of this meeting.
And again, this isn't just, you know, messing around or showing off. He is pushing very hard coming into the pit lane, and that shows just how hard he is pushing. It is hot work. Actually, it's quite pleasant outside, isn't it, Bruce? I mean, later on today, it is going to be an inferno again, as it was yesterday. At the moment, it is quite pleasant. However, these cars demand a lot from the driver. You know, if you see pictures of either Webb and those guys, they were rugby players rather than the modern jockey-sized racing driver, because you had to be a bit of a brute. Look at Froilan Gonzalez, exactly. You know, by anybody's stretch, doesn't look like any kind of a modern racing driver, but the Pampas Bull could survive inferno temperatures wrestling great big hulking cars around. There's still a degree where the historic racers, even in 45 minutes, need to have a bit physicality about them.
Well, to be honest, I've been walking around the paddocks, and some of them have clearly been working up to that fighting weight.
Well, you know,
in inimitable ways.
Yes, absolutely. You know, this is historic racing is not a young man's game. Well, owning the cars is not a young man's game. So there's definitely, a certain vintage of driver here predominantly.
The little 356A Spider slowly out of the pit lane, but Patrick Simon, visor down now, accelerates back out. He came in with a relatively comfortable lead, and certainly in the 2 races so far, he's won both of them. He's just looked very, very much at ease. And out on the track, though we see him swinging the tail around, even there he's going to push it out. That is the way he desires to drive the car. And in fact, that's the way these cars, in so many ways, are meant to be driven. And a lot of historic races will take years to get the confidence. They know how valuable their car is. They don't want to be too, how should we say, flamboyant, but in many ways, if you're good enough, that is the way you need to drive it, to push out towards the edge of adhesion on those tyres, and not much give in the tyres in the way that a modern racing tyre would have, or more to the point, actually, it's probably more give than there is, but has to be driven in a different way. And Patrick, you know, it's made for TV. And we were saying yesterday how just to watch the car coming up, the rear shot as it goes over the Dunlop curve, the top of the hill, rising, sliding, and the throttle being applied, and the car lurching with a bit of pitch and yaw. But if the driver's on top of it, it really is artistry. It's poetry in motion.
AC Ace with a Bristol engine. This is the immediate predecessor, of course, to the fabulous AC Shelby Cobra. This is the car that Carroll Shelby took and shoehorned a great big American V8 into, with a 2.6-litre Bristol 6-cylinder engine.
Oh dear, that's the A6 GCS Barchetta, Stefan Rettenmeyer.
Very pretty Maserati, and again, if you know what a Maserati birdcage looks like, you know that's only one step removed, don't you? So there's the predecessor to the birdcage, or the forerunner of the birdcage.
Yeah, that was some way down the pack, just outside the top 20, having made his pit stop. The pit window is still open, but vast majority, I'd say, in fact, every single person has now completed their final pit stop, hopefully, of this meeting. They've had the day race, the night race, and clearly something has just gone ping on that little Maserati. The DB Panhard coupe, obviously competed here at Le Mans. Looks like a car you'd simply find out on the road. The sort of car that would have excited me in a French campsite in the mid-60s.
And it exactly is as well, but they've also got a service vehicle that is an estate version of that, liveried up exactly the same. And that's, you know, all of those tiny little touches are why we love historic racing so much. Well, you can tell how much these drivers and teams have put into it. I was thinking about that earlier, actually. You're in 6 grids of 48 cars, so you're racing every 6 hours, basically, and that means very little rest after the sweltering heat of yesterday, for the team re-preparing the car, then going out at some stage during the night hours for another race, and then re-preparing the car for a 3rd day of action, effectively. It's a 3-day meeting jammed into a 24-hour period. There's been very little sleep. That was the driver of our Austin Healey that shed its hub, and you can see he's just absolutely crushed. And you know, you've come so far and we're just ready to enjoy this race so much, and then it's all just been, the heart's been ripped out of it for him.
Well, anybody who's been to a 24-hour race, whatever you're feeling at the end of the race, undoubtedly tired. The emotions come straight to the surface. And also the whole procedure ahead of a race, they have to sit in the collection area for about half an hour before the race, then the grid formation. So really for a 53-minute race, it's about a 2-hour chunk of time minimum that's taken up. So a very valid point, and particularly if you're racing in multiple events, you're literally in and out of the collection area, onto the grid and back out again. And Patrick Simon is one of those, and he is simply just reveling in every moment out on the circuit.
Now, you know, you hear stories, don't you, that photographers will give, you know, they move position at a race and Stirling Moss gives them a wave as he goes by, and you think, well, really? You know, do those sort of things still happen? You've got so much visibility in these cars, and it's sort of happening at a human level. Now, if you or I were sitting alongside Patrick Seaman now, we would be frankly terrified, just because it's so beyond road driving experience. But, you know, particularly down there at Arnage, the slowest corner on the track, he's clearly got enough time to pick out a photographer or a friend in the crowd, maybe even, just give them a little wave. It does not mean he's not driving the door handles off the car in the quicker stuff, because he absolutely is. Well, car number 1 there. That is one of the Aston Martin DB2s. That's a 1950 2.6-litre Aston.
Had its problems. We saw that pulling off at the side of the circuit. Then it was all fired up in the first race, and it carried on at full racing speed. But that must be heart in the mouth. No, I'm here to do 3 races. Don't break down.
Yes,
halfway through race 1. But Patrick Simon leading the race, able to go around the Porsche and the Aston Martin with considerable aplomb, plenty of speed in hand. He also went past the little Deutsch Bonnet with its, get this, 612 cubic centilitre engine.
I was going to say, that is a battle for position as well. The Porsche lighter, more nimble than the big Aston, the continent-crushing DB2. And the DB2 will again come up behind the Porsche on the straights and use all of its horsepower. The nimble Porsche squeezing in front through the chicanes. This track, you know, Porsche needed slightly bigger engine cars than the 356 to really have a big effect, but gradually class wins, like with Lotus, class wins led to the ambition to win overall. And of course, as we get through our grids later and later in the more recent history of Le Mans, we'll see that Porsche's become very much more front-running cars, and as a mark have won more 24-hour races overall than anyone else. And as you come under the Dunlop Bridge, of course, then you think also of all the other suppliers who had their own private battles, tyre manufacturer battles here at Le Mans. Massively important to all the manufacturers.
Well, this is Philippe Desraux. I just talked about his little 612cc engine. It clearly isn't working. The pit window is now closed, and that's coming into the close of their meeting in batch number 2.
Well, it may not be. They may be able to get it running on 2 again and go back out. So
yeah, we're into the final 10 minutes. I think by the time they've got out their assorted tools, they'll probably decide enough is enough. One thing I just want to raise, Martin, is when we look at these grids, we think, oh gosh, some of these cars were really underpowered, but we forget that their road cars were even less powerful. And it was a chance for people to learn some craft. Great to see people dressing in the period fashion that is so encouraged here at the Le Mans Classic. And if you're watching anywhere from all around the world on LeMansClassic.com. We hope you're enjoying the streaming, but what Martin and I would just like to stress, this meeting, it's our first visit to it, is a phenomenon. There are so many things to look at out around the circuit. There are car clubs with 8,500 cars in the paddock. The paddocks themselves cover pretty much the entire camping area on the infield that's used at the Grand Prix, the 24 hours every June. But it is huge. We would love to come back and have a day off or many days off to walk around and take it all in. But a chance for people to get close to these cars and compare the fact a Lotus 11 on the right, number 4, and little Dina Panhard in the same race. That is why this car in its little paddock, the little Dina, was drawing as much attention to the cars that are likely to win it, the D-types.
Now, Plateau 1 has just finished, and that is Nigel Burnett's Talbot 105. The Talbot's very much the dominant force in front-running terms in Plateau 1 for the oldest cars from 1923 to 1939. And in fact, I saw him just as we were arriving at the circuit this morning, claiming victory with a fantastic drive in that car again. So they have had a really successful time in Plateau 1. That's all come to an end. This is the final 10 minutes of racing. Perhaps a little bit more, because when the time runs down, the next time the leader gets to the line, he'll be greeted by the checkered flag.
Well, we keep seeing Patrick Simon leading the race comfortably about a dozen seconds. Carlos Monteverde, Gary Pearson's this one, the number 21 D-type, in second place. We've seen the Richard Wilson, Martin Stretton, Maserati, that's third, but it's being hunted down, and at the pace of change, John Young will catch and pass it in the third of the D-types, the number 17 car, the one that won here in 1955. So we could pick him out because he was lapping, in fact, 25 seconds quicker last time around than this car, the Wilson Stretton, now with Richard Wilson on board, this lovely 250S Maserati that just looks so super delicate.
Yeah. Well, it's got that finesse of touch that the Maseratis had so often. The 450 was a bit more of a blunt object in terms of its performance and a bit more of a brute to drive, but certainly it lacked nothing in pace. There behind, you can see the dark-coloured number 17 D-type, the former Le Mans winner. So he is charging for a place on the podium. As you said, at the rate of catching, I think he's likely to get there as well.
Yeah, absolutely so. And John Young knows these D-types very well indeed. He's had a little dink on the nose. You can see on the white band around the well, the mouth, the nose, whatever you want to call it, on at the front of the car, but clearly not affecting the performance. And thank you very much. Another one for the cameras. This one, of course, is the one with the largest fin out of the group. Dunlop curve has been a point of many rotations so far. I think people get sucked into the corner, realise they're about to try their braking a tad too late. They see the gravel trap and they try and swerve around it. They don't want to end their race, and it's also uphill. You have a face full of it.
Well, the other thing is you're coming on for a long right-hander. There's no straight to settle the car before you then have to turn into a tight left-hander. And so you've already got the tail starting to move, and as you get on the brakes, the tail is easing you out into a sort of long slide in the wrong direction. And unless you've really got on top of it early enough, then the momentum is going all the wrong way. And as you try and turn left, the rear of the car is just going, no, I'm already going left, the front can't. And then you're all at 6s and 7s.
And in fact, in that particular instance, he got the first part of the corner, the hard part of the corner right, but tried to turn too sharp too soon to the right, and the painted line inside the curb, I think he had that classic reasoning we've had from various drivers in the past. I slipped on the paint. Nice tidy spin at the top of the hill, but he just tucked himself too far into the corner, and down it went. Again,
with the soft sidewalls and the soft springing on these cars relative to modern cars, actually, you still, particularly in the older machinery, Plateau 1, Plateau 2, you still really have to keep away from the curbs. The curbs, the rumbly, vibraty curbs here, are pretty brutal for these cars, and they really upset them. So again, you touch the curb on the inside. In a modern car, you probably don't notice so much. On these, it just makes the car jump sideways, and of course, once the wheels are off the ground, slightly limited for grip.
Now, whenever you get the replay, well, we saw number 11 C-type come out at the same time. That's Nicolas Burt came out at the same time as the 18 C-type, and their battle has been broken up, but clearly rather more broken up with the run up the escape road. But thank goodness for escape roads. And at the end of the Mulsanne Straight, of course, there used to be this giant sand trap in which some drivers did more digging with the bucket and spade than they did on their summer holidays to get their cars back out. We just had a sight of the number 4 Lotus being driven very well by Serge Kriknoff. He's up into 5th place. That really is a great performance, and I honestly believe he has got the performance to match the top 4 runners, the 3 Jaguar D-types and the little Maserati, and that D-type number 17 is now through into 3rd place. But Serge Kriknoff, fantastic drive in his little Lotus 11. Best he could possibly do, 5th place.
Well, here's the predecessor to the 11, the Lotus 9. We saw that in the pit lane earlier with those much larger fins, wings at the rear of the car, if you like. Coming towards us, Maseratis, TRs,
little
nose round the
Keith on the left.
TR2, yeah.
Fraser Nash also on the left. Morgan coming up. And again, Martin, this is the bluff nose Morgan.
Yeah, flat rad Morgan, the pre-war version, basically. That's a Morgan +4. And again, you know, you think of Morgans as being low-slung sports cars, and empirically, yes, they are, but in the field in which it finds itself, it's by far not a low-slung sports car, it's a sports car. And the Lotus 9, very much lower. A Morgan driver, if you were to sit in that as a road car, you think, you know, I'm down below the wheel nuts of some big trucks. Lotus is sort of barely above the tyre trode of many big trucks.
Yeah, it's like sliding one of those little beds you can lie on when under a car. It's effectively what it is, you know.
Or in a little sweaty box in the back of Le Mans somewhere. Exactly right.
Great to see the ACA. I must confess, I do prefer the Ace to the Cobra, because I think the lines were super clean. Of course, the Cobra had much more performance, but once those big wheel arches started being pushed out to the side, that might be
that's
how I would have set it up on the little Cooper
another
bobtails.
sheared hub. Yeah, that's a Type 39 Cooper bobtail.
Robbie Bernberg and Paul Hugo.
Saw that earlier on, didn't we? Battling up in the top 10, and I'm afraid...
We've just had a change for the lead.
Yes, we have, haven't we?
Just suddenly, well, I noticed the race leader had a slower lap, so Patrick Simon, whether something... You know what? I think Patrick just wants to do a bit of chasing for a while.
Having a play.
Could have dropped back because he was stroking, he was, what did we say, 12, 15 seconds clear, seemed to have it under control. Maybe he was waving for help to that photographer down at Arnage. Help, I've got a problem, but I actually think it's Patrick has become a little lonely at the front of the race. 2 and a bit minutes remaining. Will they get past the Dina Panhard before the end of the lap? Most certainly they will, as they sweep up towards Indianapolis. But
blimey.
Well, slalom anyone? Why not?
Absolutely. Weaving their way through traffic. Well, has something gone wrong with that pale blue D-type? Patrick Seaman doesn't look overly stressed, but then he wouldn't be, because if something's gone wrong with it, there's not much he can do by getting excited other than try and nurse the car back.
Well, he lost 7 sectors to the race leader in the middle sector, and he's only about 2 seconds behind at the moment, 1 second at the last interval. So whether he simply got caught out in traffic, he's still driving it with great verve, but at the moment Monteverde and the Monteverde Pearson car is pulling away.
It is possible that he went off somewhere. The lead D-type is now this cream-coloured car. Please out around the Lotus 9.
Message on the screen, this is the final lap of the race, the last race of the third running for the Batch 2 cars, the cars that raced at Le Mans between 1949 and 1956.
Patrick Seaman struggling to catch the Lotus 9, actually, so he has got a problem with that D-type. Little Lotus 1100cc, 3.4 litres of XK engined D-type, can't get by it.
That's
so he has got a problem. It seems to me as if it might have lapsed onto 5 cylinders. Yeah, that doesn't sound entirely clean on the pickup. Now, of course, we're getting noise from the Lotus as well, but I'm not entirely sure that that car is as healthy as it might be. So, after 2 wins for the pale blue number 3,
2 second places for the cream at 21. So it's D-types all the way, but the order has suddenly changed. It looks as though he was home and hosed, and Patrick Simon dropping further and further back. In fact, he won't even be in the same image very soon indeed. Here comes the race leader with just sweeping through the Porsche curves for the final time. If we look out the window of our commentary box, he's straight ahead for us. He's got the 2 Ford chicanes to go. Doesn't have to trouble himself. He can look in his rearview mirror past that dorsal fin, if you will, the rounded dorsal fin on the earlier short-nosed D-types, and first corner out of the way, second part of the sequence underway. No need to be too fanboy, but you have to, really, because you just won the race. After 2 second places, the Monteverde Pearson car sweeps over the finish line, and it's going to be about a dozen seconds until Patrick Simon comes through. He's only now going through the second part of the Ford chicane. So a turn up for the books. It looks as though they were heading for their 3rd second place, but for Gary Pearson and Carlos Monteverde, victory, and that will taste very sweet indeed. And Patrick Simon does make it to the second place in the shade from the pit building. Looking down in his cockpit. Well, he'll have had fun, 2 wins, but he's looking down.
Shakes his head. That was definitely not part of the game plan. And this D-type, which has been the front runner all the way through, just struggling in the last lap of the last race of 3. He's looking down into the cockpit, trying to find something to look at accusingly.
The gear lever, he's patting the top of his head with both hands. The gear lever is probably down in the footwell. He's yanked it too hard or something, but anyhow. And here comes John Young through into 3rd place a short while ago. Gap between 1st and 2nd was 13.7 seconds at the end of the race, and John Young has really driven very well in the closing laps. Just looking at Patrick Simon's lap time. Final lap for Carlos Monteverde's car was 5 minutes 3, 5 minutes 25 for Patrick Simon. All went wrong on that final lap. John Young, well, it was very, very hard to come from the back, but he did it very well indeed.
The Le Mans winning D-type finishing in 3rd, and the Wilson Stretton car that Martin Stretton started Martin's undoubtedly beavered off. Oh, huge handful of opposite to gather up the Maserati 250S as it comes across the line in 4th position. And don't forget, as we said, it's not just this race that decides who the overall winner is, it's the total time taken in all 3 races for each of the cars, multiplied by a handicapping factor, basically. So the smaller cars will rise further up the order. And after the second race, the number 30 Porsche 356 was leading overall from the Triumph TR2. We saw the TR2 coming across the line. They look fairly happy with themselves, and I think they are in with a really good shout at potentially winning overall.
Well, another car that's going to do very well too is the smaller engine, the Lotus XI. Serge Kriknoff, driven it really well, 5th overall. Great looking car with the red and white livery there. Almost like the Escuri Espadon Ferraris of Rüede Fischer back in the 1950s, the Swiss restaurateur racing in the Formula 1 World Championship. Always had that white triangle on the nose of his cars, perhaps in tribute to that, but very, very well driven, the little Lotus XI, and he's some way clear of the next car. So people out around the circuit just loving them.
Beautiful sunny day here at the Le Mans Classic 2018. Just seen the end of the second group of cars, Plateau number 2, their 3rd and final race. Marshall's dealing with a fire in the final part of the lap. That's the number 53.
Yeah, it's Eric Stice, the Belgian
Aston
racer.
Martin DB4.
No, it's Lotus
Oh, it is.
11.
It is.
Lotus 11.
Yes, so
As
it
the
is.
smoke clears, we can see the body shape. What a shame, and hopefully there's not too much damage. But the fact is, here at the end of the 3rd race means they've had a day race, a night race, and come away hopefully with the car not too damaged. So at the end of the 3rd race, victory with a final lap turnaround. The Carlos Monteverde, Gary Pearson D-Type taking the front as Patrick Simon struggled, was about 20 seconds down on his pace, and you could see at the end of the race something clearly was a mark. So no trio of wins for Patrick Simon in Clive Joy's D-Type. He has to settle for 2nd. A great drive through the order from John Young to make it 3 D-Types at the top, ahead of the Richard Wilson and Martin Stretton Maserati that kept them honest, but simply didn't have the pace of the mighty Ds.